Welcome to another episode of Patio Pondering. Today I have a longtime friend, and guess what, folks? It's another person I met on Twitter. Heaven forbid I rely on my Twitter network. We have with us Karen Corrigan from Central Illinois. Karen and I met on Twitter many years ago. We've been through the trenches and the battles of sexism in agriculture and big versus small and all those fun things. So today we're going to talk about Karen's upbringing, a little bit about what she's doing now, and see if we can find some obscure little things that show us what is special about Karen and what she does. So Karen, before we get into it, can you just give us a 30,000 foot view of what you're doing today and how you're working in agriculture?
Yeah, so I'm still part owner and operator of McGillicuddy Corrigan Agronomics. John McGillicuddy and I started our independent consulting company back in 2003. So what does that make? 22 years?
Wow. Time flies.
Yeah, so we work with farmers in about 9 states, but mostly corn and soybean growers, although the North Dakota guys get into a few other crops. Mm-hmm. And there's some wheat here and there. In my free time, I'm also a full-time instructor at Heartland Community College, and I teach the agronomy, soils, horticulture, pest management, all kinds of just basically what I do in real life, I'm teaching in the classroom. So
all things agronomy.
Yes. Plus a few like introduction to agriculture, which kind of goes across everything. I have 2 kids, 3 dogs. Rizzo, you can see, Fergie's down here, and Addison's over there. So they're all named after Cubs players.
Okay. Go Cubs, go.
Yeah. And so I'm a master gardener. Trying to think what else. I never remember what everything I do.
Well, and you also are a co-host on the Girls Talk Ag podcast.
Right. We haven't had any episodes lately, but yeah, we did that for several years and life just kind of got busy, but we'll maybe do a reunion show here or there.
Well, we still remember it. So I remember, as we're talking about memories, I was shelling corn on the Schaefer farm, which is around the corner from us, means nothing to you, but Schaefer farm, and was trying to finish up before I had to get on an airplane and fly to South Dakota. And I purposely drove a little slow because you had a podcast and you were talking to Jen's daughter.
Oh, Casey?
And Casey. And I stopped the combine. I made it to my plane on time, but I stopped so I could listen to that podcast. So those obscure little things that we remember over the years.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up and what sparked your interest in agronomy?
I grew up in LaSalle County, which is just south of Interstate 80. It's still central Illinois, but kind of north central. My parents have a corn and soybean farm. My dad still farms there, as does my brother. And we had, a few animals here and there for 4-H projects. I actually had no interest in agriculture whatsoever until my older brother told me the only reason I wasn't taking an ag class as a freshman was because I knew I couldn't get an A in it. So then, of course, I had to prove him wrong. And so that's really how I got into the actual agriculture. I have 4 brothers, so
okay,
my duties were more around the house and watching the younger 2 while everything else was going on.
So we would call that normal farm wife duties.
Yeah, for the most part, because my mom was working, and so I had the 2 youngest ones, which aren't young anymore, but and just kind of, keeping stuff together and all that kinds of stuff. So I was involved heavily in FFA in high school. I went to the University of Illinois. In high school, I did some speeches on water quality. So that was my initial foray when I went to the University of Illinois, was more like agroecology.
Okay.
And then I started working in the weed science lab and thought, crop protection seems much more fun.
Yeah.
So I worked in the weed science lab, and I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin in Madison for my master's. And I moved to Des Moines to work for a crop insurance company, which my boss happened to be the guy who's been my business partner for the last 27 years.
Really? Isn't that cool how our paths just go different places? So,
And
all
now
right,
I'm back into soil health and water quality, so it kind of has to come full circle.
there you go. All right, so let's talk obscure now. Outer Creek Township, LaSalle County.
No, I was in Brookfield.
Okay. Do you know any Stasels that live in Streeter?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anyways, that's where my great grandfather family lived, and he moved back to Indiana. So every time I go on 70 and it says Streeter, I says I should drive through there. And my grandmother would go. Well, I did drive through once, and it was like I blinked, so I didn't completely miss it, but I didn't blink twice. So you weren't really involved in the production ag as a child? I mean,
not very much. I had an older brother and a brother that was two years younger, and they were mostly the ones in the field.
Okay. So you jumped into ag kind of as to meet a challenge from your brother, though.
For the most part, yes.
So have you paid him back for that? Give him a thank you for being a jerk and getting me into this crazy industry?
No. I'm not sure if he even remembers that.
Huh. Okay. Wow. But you were involved in 4-H and FFA in the speech.
Yeah, I did prepared public speaking. And so I think I did 2 speeches on water quality. And so that's kind of where my interest lied at that point, which I kind of 180'd, went into crop protection. But, you know, a lot of that was just influenced by who was at the U of I at that time. I worked for Dr. Wax and Dr. Stoller, who have done a lot they're both retired now, but I worked with them and Dr. Simmons and just kind of really enjoyed the people and what we were doing. And so I went to grad school in weed science and then kind of pulled myself back out of that corner after grad school and have been more of a full, well-rounded agronomist since then. I'm also a certified crop advisor. Okay.
So you said you pulled yourself out of that. If you would have stayed in weed science, do you think you would have pigeonholed yourself?
Well, I mean, it was strictly weed science, but obviously I had to focus on a lot more as an agronomist and not just weeds.
Okay.
Although they are kind of my
Well,
love.
yeah. When you put on Twitter or someplace, hey, can you send me samples of this obscure weed? Like, yes, I can tell your love is weeds. But do you think that if you hadn't taken a jump after your grad school, that you would have been stuck in the weed science, crop protection world?
No, I mean, I would have loved to have been a technical agronomist for a chemical company, but right when I was graduating was all the restructuring. And so I had looked, and also extension was restructuring at that point because I had looked at extension positions also. And this one happened to come up. And so I took that. And that's just kind of how things went.
Okay. So you're an agronomist, you're a business owner, you're CCA.
Yep.
Master gardener.
Instructor.
College professor.
Yeah.
What in your upbringing sparked you to be so involved in so many different things? It can't just be your brother.
I don't know. We had the master farmer ceremony a couple of weeks ago for the Prairie Farmer, and a friend of mine, Chet Esther, was one of the recipients, and he made the comment to me that, you know, a young kid had asked him how he got to do all these things, and he said, well, when people asked, I said yes. And I decided that I was going to use that from now on instead of, I don't know how to say no.
I love that. And if my listeners want another lesson on saying yes, go back and listen to my discussion with Corey Hillebo, because he is in his position because he said yes. And I love that as a way to prompt and suggest to people instead of don't say no. It's like, it's like, yes, I'll do that. So I think that is a great lesson for a lot of people. So you're the second person that we've been able to. So you said yes to a lot of things.
I did. I ended up in teaching because a friend from college was looking for an agriculture professor, and she decided that she thought they have lawyers that teach law classes. They should have an agronomist teach the agronomy class. So I started as an adjunct at Carl Sandburg College teaching one class a semester, and I did that for 2 years. And then I added Heartland Community College when one of their professors went on maternity leave, and I have not left there since. So,
Wow. And so that first time you said yes at Carl Sandburg, you didn't have an idea it would turn into being all-inclusive where you are
no,
now, did
I
you?
just thought it would be, it seemed kind of fun. I thought it would just be a little side gig. I'd do one class a semester. It was partway through COVID, which ended up working out for us because I just put up a tent outside the field and we had every class out as a field day. So, but yeah, it's been fun. There's been some great kids that have gone through the programs I've taught in.
That is really neat to see what you've taken that spark of, I'm just going to teach a class into, how many classes are you teaching now?
This semester I taught 5. 3 of them were 12-week classes, so our sophomores can go out in the field. So they've been in the field this week with their internships. And then I have 2 classes that have about 3-4 more weeks to go.
So that those sophomores will then have an associate's degree when they're done this year?
Yes, they'll have that in May.
Okay.
A lot of them are doing field work. And so, they've been in the field this week. And since their classes were done, it's worked out well for them.
Okay. So what is the next step for a lot of your students?
I have a lot of students that are 2-year degrees. Most of them were working while they were taking classes, and a lot of them are just going full time where they had been working.
And what type of work are they doing?
I had a couple that will go home and farm.
Okay.
Another one that worked for a retailer. Another one who's going to work for a large farmer. I'm trying to think. We had one who ended up staying at the college and is working in the science department.
Okay.
So it's kind of all over. We have a couple that are going, continuing on to Illinois State University, which is also in Bloomington, to finish their degrees. There's a couple that want to be ag teachers. But yeah, they're I have another one that works for more of a research type company.
Okay.
So there's one that works for a show cattle farm. So kind of all over the board.
Would you say about 3/4 of them would go straight into the labor market, another 25% continue education?
I'd say it's probably 60-40.
Okay.
When I first started, it was more 50-50, but the last 2 years or so, it's more of a 2-year degree. But their 2-year degree will also, they could still go into a 4-year degree. So that option is always open for them to go back and do that at some point if they choose.
Are you seeing that there's more push from the outside for those people to get that 2-year degree and come directly into the labor market? Or is it just kind of an anomaly that things change?
Well, I think it's more where the jobs are. And also we have some certificate programs. So agriculture is in the career and technical education. So several of my kids who are going to go home and farm are also getting welding certificates. Things that will be useful to them when they're back home. A lot of them are doing their CDL also.
So it's a combination of a vocational technical with more of a liberal arts together.
Right. So they do take the gen eds, which will allow them to go on after that. But, if they're really interested in welding or something like that, they have the opportunity to take those classes also.
That's really neat because from a teaching standpoint, I bet it's pretty gratifying for you because you could see, hey, I taught Joe all this in these 2 or 3 classes, and 2 years down your road, you see like, oh, I'm using all that stuff you taught me.
I had one student in my class this week who was a former student of mine who's going in ag education, and she needed observation hours. So she came back to watch one of the classes this past week.
In weed science as a master's, I don't think you did any classes in the School of Education.
No, I did not.
How was the jump from being a CCA, master gardener, working agronomist to going into the classroom?
Well, I felt like I was always a little bit behind on that as far as especially the big words they use. But I have done different classes at the college for professional development. I did an advanced digital learning certificate, which helps with, using Canvas and the different learning platforms and learning to teach online also if needed. And I've taken in a couple other things that just help improve different aspects of teaching. We get weekly newsletters that give hints on certain things that I've tried. And so I just try to piece together different things. But I think part of what makes the kids like my classes is that it's more about what they really need to know. Even in like in soil fertility, we were looking at different nutrient deficiencies. And I'm like, well, this, you won't see this here in McLean County, but if you go to Mason County, you might encounter this, or, you'll see this in North Dakota, but not here, different things like that.
Thinking back to your time there in LaSalle County, outside Streeter, can you think about anything that your parents did or what you learned on the farm that allowed you or prompted you to say yes to so many things?
I think I said yes a lot to FFA contests. Even ones I wasn't prepared for. I was going to the contest as a section officer and ended up participating in the dairy judging contest at state and ended up
Since you're here
without knowing anything, outside of the fact that my mom grew up on a dairy farm. Right before I left, she said, only look at the hooks, pins, and udders and just judge them on that. So I did, and I ended up 10th. So.
Wow. So you ticked off a lot of people that actually practiced.
Yeah, I was just like, I looked at those 3 things and rated them on that, and that's all I did.
Well, a lot of times the rear view gives the best view.
But we did have a lot of opportunities. I went to a high school that had a nuclear power plant. So definitely we were blessed with a lot of money to do a lot of things. And I think part of going there, like no one was poor. We were all rich together,
Okay.
We all had new textbooks. We all had new PE uniforms. We had new football uniforms. If you needed an instrument, there was one for you. So it was definitely a little utopia. Which has made it a little bit hard to watch my kids go to somewhere that's not like Disneyland. But I mean, we had lots of opportunities because of that. So
it's easy to say yes when life is easy.
Yes, definitely. And we had people to drive buses, which I know is a huge problem right now. But there was never anyone, we weren't lacking in anything. We had bus drivers, we had coaches, we had, math teachers to do math leads. I mean, everybody else said yes too.
But at the same time, one could say that living in Utopia or Disneyland made your life easy in school. I mean, you weren't struggling because you had books, you had the instruments you needed, you had the supplies you needed for classrooms.
We also had a superintendent that had a lot of expectations for all of us. Like, you did not misbehave. You did not write on a locker. You did not write on a desk. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was a good place, but, I mean, there's other kids that didn't have the money that still had great opportunities.
So he instilled to whom much is given, much is expected, correct?
I would say so. Yes.
Okay. Did you have that same mentality at home?
I don't know. I guess I haven't thought of it. I guess we just kind of, there were so many of us, it had to work a certain way or it wasn't going to work.
Sometimes we have to do what we have to do.
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer, yes. And you had 6 of you that divide and conquer, correct?
There were 5. I had 4 brothers and then my parents.
So
there were
7 of you. Okay. Yeah. Makes it easy when to work, but when it comes to cutting a piece of pie, if you cut it in 8, who's getting the extra piece?
Everything was in a sheet pan.
There you go. I think about the time that we've spent together over the years and your work with the podcast, your work with customers, and now you being a teacher. And there's one thing that is consistent along all those interactions, and it's communication. Mm-hmm. And you're a great communicator. How? Okay. What did you do to become a good communicator?
I think part of it was I did speech, which I think is important, gets you out in front of people. I was president of our local FFA chapter, and obviously you have to get out in front of people for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it just kind of, maybe it's part of my personality. I don't know.
It's interesting you're talking about doing speech. I think back to Corey Hillebo, partly because he just sent me a text saying that, no, I got to fix the planter. But his yes that he talked about in FFA was saying yes to an extemporaneous speech contest.
I was not brave enough to do those. I only did prepared.
Well, both of them take a set of cojones. How are you trying to instill that say yes in your children?
Well, we've tried to do a lot of different activities to kind of find where they fit. You know, I have one that's into basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Another, they both curl. I don't know if you knew that, but my girls do curling.
Oh, God, we should have changed that changes the whole podcast. No. We're going to talk about getting the rock in the house now. Come on.
Yep, throwing the rocks at houses. Yep.
Who's got the hammer?
They can tell you way more than I can just sitting there watching.
That's really obscure curling talk. though. We're off the rail. People thought that agronomy was obscure. Now we're talking curling. That's really obscure. Wow. So sorry to distract you, but whew. So you give your kids experiences.
Right. And they've done, theater. They've done different like art camps, clay camps, all kinds of stuff just to kind of see where their interest is. And
they're exposed to a lot of technology too. Through the family.
Well, through the family, but also just through school. You know, we didn't have Commodore 64s until I was like in middle school, where, as you know, they've been using everything since they could figure it out.
I got a lecture today on the way home from school about the 6090 graphics card costing $2,000. But if you go to this one, it'll be, I was like, yeah, okay, Jolly. Yep. Got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just worried about getting the left-handed threaded bolt in the right hole on the planter.
It's amazing how much further along tech-wise those kids are.
Yes. But at the same time, I think you could say that you and I were prepared in a different way on other things like extemporaneous speech, prepared speech, leadership skills that I think sometimes we're neglecting. Well,
and I think it's harder to teach now because you don't have to memorize everything. Everything is in your hand on your phone. So it's more about thinking through the process, finding good resources, evaluating those resources and figuring out what the problem is.
Does that make your job more difficult when you've got so many tools and so much information available?
Sometimes it's hard to bring it down to exactly what you need. It's hard to condense everything. So, we can't talk about every single insect they might encounter, but we can talk about the top ones and then how we would identify the rest of them if needed. We look at the different tools we can use, whether it's an app or a website to find good information, and just, different things like that. Their most frequently asked question, though, is, can we call you after we graduate?
Yes, it's $175 an hour. Plus a retainer. How do you work both with your children and with your students to be resilient enough to go find some of the answers on their own? And let's look at your description of finding insects. Like, okay, here's a eastern cutworm. How do you help them to say, okay, I know it's not this, but how do I find it without saying, I don't know?
Well, I give them, I don't generally use textbooks. Like my applied agronomy class, I gave them each the Purdue handbook, the little one. Mm-hmm. Things that they would actually use after school.
Okay.
And so we just kind of, I put it out there and then they have to search through until they can figure out what it is. They had to do that. Their final was last week, and I just put together this whole scenario in a cornfield from the beginning of the season to the end and just put up different pictures that they had to identify. is that something that you need to fix? How do you fix it? Different things like that. And they had to do that through the whole season. And they'd have to look it up on there. They could look it up online, but they had to, find the resources and then the answers.
Really practical education.
I hope so.
Okay. So how do you balance throwing in the theoretical that sets the basis for a lot of that practicality we have to
generally
use?
Those are the 100 level or the first level classes. And then like my applied agronomy are the second year students. So
Gotcha.
They've already taken all those.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, we put in 2 classes. One is a pest management class, which is helpful in getting their commercial applicators license in different categories. And then the applied field agronomics actually does a lot of the learning objectives from the certified crop advisor, which is another thing that they could take the test after class and hopefully apply for that.
Wow, I almost want to come take your classes. Man, in 2 years
tough.
I could do all this? It'd be kind of cool to hang out and say, hey, I hear Mrs. Corrigan's a real tough teacher.
And I say, Mrs. Corrigan isn't here. My mom's somewhere else.
That's great.
So,
as you're working with your students and you look at your kids, what do you think they're going to do?
Right now, one wants to be like a preschool kindergarten teacher.
Good.
The other one, she had spent quite a bit of time in the hospital. And so she kind of liked the child life coordinators that would come in and visit and do the crafts and the different things with the kids. But she's also not great with blood and things like that. So I'm not sure if that will end up being, but she has said that she wants Grandpa's farm. So we'll see.
That's aspirational. Yeah,
I think she wants more animals, not necessarily corn and beans, though.
Oh, she wants work.
Yeah. So
she wants to have to be there 365 days, not 45 or 50. So are your brothers on the farm?
One of them is.
And that's straight corn soy right now?
Yes. My brother does have
Boring.
cattle at his house.
Okay. So he wants to work a little more.
Yeah.
As you're working with those students and you're trying to make a practical education, and as we're trying to raise our kids, are you putting together scenarios where they're able to do an if-then, kind of like the basic we learned, if this, to try and teach them to be a little more self-sufficient and resilient in their thought processes?
I use I would call them escape rooms or puzzles for them to have to put things together to figure it out. I don't just give exams. And sometimes through the project in my horticulture class is to actually develop a certain square footage of garden from beginning to end. And they can use any theme or flowers or plants that they want, but they have to put them in the right spot. They have to have the correct amount of sunlight, the correct amount of space for the mature plant, and all of that. So it's not an exam, but it is putting together hopefully everything they've learned over the semester.
How many of your clients do you wish would have been exposed to the same education that your students are?
I don't know. They kind of did get it because that's kind of how we started, was doing a bunch of seminars with farmers. So they get it in a different way, I think. I feel like the farmers are more in tune, where the college kids are still kids in some aspects, they don't, farmers, it affects their bottom line today.
So they're more focused because I'm here.
Yeah.
So let's think back 23 years, though. Were those farmers, the first farmers that you guys had as clients, they were green as a gourd with the way that you manage, the way that you soil sample, the way you make your recommendations. You've molded your customers, you've managed your customers, but those first customers you had, I'm sure there's some that you wanted to wring their neck and it's like, don't you understand this?
I was a lot more obnoxious when I was younger, but
so you did tell them.
It wasn't necessarily about that, but I was really great with herbicides, and that's not something a lot of them were great with at the time. So that was kind of my in with them. And honestly, if you can do anything to save them a little bit of money, then you can build the trust. But a lot of our business was built on what the farmers said they wanted. They wanted somebody to give them advice who was not selling them anything. And the options for extension educators were getting cut, and they were, less and less in the state. And, they still have to buy things from their local retailers or wholesalers, but they're having somebody else give them suggestions on what they should do.
So you were upsetting some apple carts when you guys started.
I laugh when they say peer groups now, or things like that. I was like, I guess we've been doing that for a long time. It's not really anything new. So, but I've made a few enemies, let's say, but my job is to help the farmer. It's not to help the person selling stuff. So.
Yeah. And so you're truly a consultant.
Yes.
Okay. That puts you in a powerful position.
I'm an agronomist consultant.
Oh yeah. No. I could say I was a swine nutritionist consultant. Like, okay, here's the best thing for you because of X, Y, and Z. That is an interesting position to be in because you're the expert and they rely on you to be the expert. And you're also impacting their bottom line because you're telling them to go to somebody different than who they've gone to.
Well, I mean, being a consultant and being able to just tell the farmer what would be best for them, I realize is a very privileged position to be in, that not everybody has those options because they work for a specific company. Mm-hmm. So I don't take that for granted, but I do try to give the best information I can to help the farmer, in any way I can.
I would assume as you work with new clients or as you're talking with even your current clients, there's a lot of legacy of, well, I just get it from the co-op or I get it from XYZ Supply and they've taken care of me for years. I'm sure that you've been in a situation where you opened some eyeballs and your clients were like, doggone it, they haven't been taking care of me. How have you walked that line of sharing bad news that could really tick them off?
Well, I mean, I kind of frame it more as this is what I would do. And, if all of us would do the same thing, then we're not all necessary. Mm-hmm. But it still comes down to the fact that it's the farmer's money and they need to make the decision based on how they feel comfortable. So whether they listen to me or listen to someone else, that has to be in their hands. So I don't get offended if they don't listen.
Okay. That's a very mature position to have. Did you have that attitude 20 years ago?
I don't know. Probably not as easily, especially if it didn't go well. But I think as you get older and you manage your own money and you realize that everybody has to do what makes them comfortable,
Okay. Well, I was on the crossroads of what you're talking about with the agronomist I used to use. He's passed away. And I suggested him to somebody that was on one of the boards we were on and said, hey, he works for me. Unbeknownst to me, their sales agronomist at their supplier was a high school friend of mine. And I was sitting down with a beer or bourbon with my high school friend, and he was complaining about this agronomist because he knew I was the agronomist. And the agronomist went in and said, hey, farmer, here's what you need to do. Boom, 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 boom. Here's what you've been doing. And if you want to do this, this is what it'll cost you. If you want to do what I want to do, this is what it costs you. And it was thousands of dollars. I mean, hey, we're going to put this in. We're going to put this in. We're going to put this in. And he had like, okay, sounds good. Sounds good. You name it. Fungicide, foliars, conditioners.
Yeah.
And
I think it's important to say, just like in any profession, there are good and bad. Mm-hmm. So you just have to find somebody who's kind of on your own wavelength. Mm-hmm. And we're not all on the same wavelengths.
No, yeah, that's right. Find somebody that meshes with you, and that mesh doesn't mean agree with you.
Right. But sees your vision and, farms or consults the way that you want to farm.
We're similar age, and I have a daughter. She doesn't have the same struggles in agriculture that you did. Did you?
Well, I didn't have the same struggles somebody like Pam Smith had either. So when I think of struggles, I always think back to her because she wasn't until like her senior year in high school, she wasn't even allowed to be an FFA.
So that's a generation before us, a little
Right.
bit, but not that much further. So I graduated in 89. Not long before that, the only FFA was she was a sweetheart, and that was all she could do. So that was 10 years before. So I guess that wasn't that long ago. So obviously your experience was not like hers, and you were allowed to be an officer and allowed to do the speech contest. So, but you weren't limited from an experience standpoint near as much as you might have been limited from an attitude. Did you experience that attitude? Like, oh,
At times. I did have 4 brothers growing up, so that part was never an issue for me. I was mostly around boys anyway. But there have been, here and there. But then I always look at him and think, he is an asshole to me, but he's kind of an asshole to everybody. So,
so from your experience with your brothers, you were able to pull out he's a jerk from he's a jerk to me because I'm a woman.
Yeah. I haven't really had any issues, but I'm not I'm claustrophobic, so I'm not going to be riding in a combine with somebody.
Okay.
That's like too tight of quarters, but I mean, and that necessarily isn't something that is helpful in my job anyway. So,
yeah.
But, and it just kind of depends. Like when I first started, it was more like the people over at that time, 25 years ago, it was people over 50 that just weren't used to women. But anybody my age and younger, we've all been around for the most part the whole time. But I've never gotten into any sticky situations. But then again, that's not my personality. So I do tell my students, and even the boy students, if something feels off, it is 2025 and there are just some bad people out there. Just get out of the situation. Make something up.
Good suggestion.
So you can pretend your phone is ringing. You have some emergency.
I think we in ag hope that we're better. Sometimes we're not. So
again, there's good and bad and everything. So
I think back to some of the fights that you and I were in, and most of the time we're on the same side.
Is hot dog a sandwich or not?
Oh. Yes. One apple can ruin the bunch. That doesn't mean the whole bunch is bad, I guess. Well, I'm glad you didn't have those experiences that I've heard that have tarnished people's lives and how they relate to people. And that's unfortunate those things have happened.
I also didn't really work for a corporation. And if there was anybody I thought was kind of sketchy, I would just be like, hey, John, you need to take care of this person. So not everybody, again, has that opportunity to do that. I'd be like, no, not talking to him.
John's not Italian, so he didn't dig a hole in the cornfield and dump a guy, okay? All right.
Yeah, exactly.
This was not a scene from Casino.
Yeah, but I'd be like, just, I think you need to deal with them.
So that goes back to managing your customers.
Right. But, if you work for a corporate company, you can't really do that.
There's ways you can, but not as easily.
Yeah.
Because it's easy for you to fire a client.
Yeah.
Not easy, but you have the mechanisms that you can because it's your company.
Yeah. I don't have to go through, several layers of HR.
Yeah. And you don't have to go to your national sales manager saying, hey, he's going to cost us $30,000 in gross margin, but he's an asshole.
Yeah.
So as you look at your children, do you think we're in a better world than they were when you started college?
I'd say it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's probably scarier from the outside.
Okay.
I watch a lot of Dateline. I'm known for that.
Okay. So I bet you listen to a lot of crime podcasts then.
I've done that also. And so, I'm always on alert for things like that. And I don't think that was as necessary back then.
Yeah.
I mean, it was still necessary to a point, but I felt like there were a lot more good people around, and now bad people can come in from all over the place. So you just never know.
Well, I struggle with this too. And maybe it's made Kim and I lazy parents. I think some people would call us lazy parents because we let our kids do a lot. But I think we trusted our kids.
Mm-hmm.
We still trust our kid. I still have a 15-year-old. He can be a pain in the rear, but he's okay. And I think that goes back a little bit to our ag backgrounds because we have to allow our our children to experience things if they're going to be part of ag.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's yes, but I think that we talk about the responsibility a lot. And when we get to our questions, the one answer we get, I learned responsibility. Well, okay, yeah, yes, we do. But I think we also, being part of ag, is we learn resiliency because things don't go as planned. And as you know, as a weed scientist and an agronomist, and me as a swine nutritionist, we're working with living beings. And biology can trump a lot of crap. And then you add into it Mother Nature. Sometimes you just can't prevent it. Yeah. And I think the last night we went to a baseball game and it was raining, it was cold. And we got to the ninth inning and our buddy Roger said, I wonder how many people are still in the stands. Well, we were in a suite and he counted there's 66 people in the stands for a minor league game. And the last inning or two, we started heckling every single batter. And we were throwing out things that mom would say at a little league game. And you've heard them all. Oh. Swing through the ball, Johnny. Make him pitch to you, Johnny. You're staying alive, Johnny. Good job. Good job. Or watch the ball to the bat. So we were screaming this to this guy and having an absolute blast with it. And I have absolutely no idea where we're going with this because I lost my train of thought. But if you talk about a batter, it's you and the pitcher and the ball. Unless there's some crazy weather doesn't come involved, it's the two of you. He throws a ball, you either hit it or you don't. It's not that simple when we're in ag. You plant the seed and you harvest. There's a whole lot of crap that goes on between there. You breed the cow, she has a baby, you feed it. There's a lot. And I think that those experiences give us some resiliency of crap happens outside of our control. And I think that makes our kids a little bit better.
Yeah. I do tell my students, if you can't make it to class or if you have a bad grade, life happens, move on. You can't control everything. And getting 100% in the class there's no reason to. So.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Is very important.
Yes.
Well, and I have a lot of non-traditional students who are juggling not just school, but work and families, and not all, maybe school is not the glass ball that can't be dropped. And so, you just have to kind of meet them where they are and give them what they need. Although, some of them need a reality check, particularly the younger ones, but, the older ones, generally they're juggling a lot and they're just, trying to stay afloat. So
I'm writing that down because I've never heard it, but it's perfect. The glass ball comment.
Oh, I think Holly Spangler was the one that said, you have rubber balls, plastic balls, and glass balls. Mm-hmm. And, based on your priorities, the glass ones you can't drop. The other ones you can, drop and fetch later.
Yeah.
Or let someone else pick them up.
It is really neat to be able to hear about your experiences and how you work with your customers and how you're raising your kids and how you working through FFA and having 4 brothers you have to deal with toughened you to be in agriculture. But at the same time, your experiences make you a better teacher. So I'm glad to hear how you're using those experiences to help the next generation and sometimes your generation, as you talked about non-traditional students. So I know we're short on time, so we're going to end with 5 questions. The first question is, get my notes right, what is one lesson from ag that you carry with you every day?
Adapt. Everything doesn't have to go as planned.
As we're adapting to the sound.
I know. I'm trying to get the youngest one to come down and let her out.
He's like, hello, I need help down here, child. Number 2, if you could have coffee with any historical figure in ag, who would it be?
I'm not a coffee drinker.
Okay.
But I would drink tea. Historical person in ag. I don't know. I've met some great people on Twitter. I love talking to Pam Smith. I should probably just call her and have tea. I'm not sure if there's anyone, prior to that I want to speak with. I would love to have tea with Angie Setzer because I have never met her in person.
Oh, boo-hooey-ha.
I have not.
All the talking and all the shit you've thrown at people over the years and all the fights that we've been in on Twitter, and you haven't met her in person?
Angie and I have never met in person.
Oh, good God. We're going to have a meet-up. You guys are only, 4 hours apart? 5, maybe?
Oh, sure, yeah. I've met her husband in person, but I haven't met her.
Man, you just burst a huge bubble. So you've obviously met Jen.
Yes. But Jen's a lot closer. And Jen had to drive by me to go see her kid at college.
Man, you know what? I bet if my house is equidistant, well, no. It'd be equidistance between Angie and Jennifer.
And see, Jen and I, we would do field trips at the hippie farmers at Joe's.
Oh my gosh. No, I've been to Hippie's house.
Yeah. So we've always, they were growing hemp there for a while. They had the weed zapper. So we've had all kinds of field trips to Joe's farm.
Wow. I don't know if I can recover from this knowing you've never been to see Angie. Holy smokes. Okay. I want to take that as a challenge to coordinate that somehow. All right. Whew. All right, listeners, I've recovered. What is one underappreciated or quirky thing about your expertise or agriculture in general that you wish more people knew?
I wish more people knew the active ingredients in their herbicides.
Oh, I resemble that comment. That's an obscure one. Yeah. And I always tell my farmers, if you're not going to read the label, call me and I'll read it to you. Well, sometimes those ones, what's the imethapyr? How do you say that one?
Imethapyr?
Yes. Okay. I don't know what product it is. Well, it also, it gets me. It gets me when I do invoices for my landlords because we cover all the costs and then we get reimbursed for them. That you put in, this is generic Callisto. Like, okay, what the hell's Callisto? So that's a good one. Doesn't that get back to the 4 R's? Right product, right place. If you don't know what you're spraying, you don't have
to learn all the active ingredients because all of our spray sheets in grad school were in the common name, but everything on the shelf was in the trade name jug. So that's how I had to, learn why I had to learn it all.
And as we get fewer of them, I guess we should really know. All right. So the fourth question, what is your favorite ag-related tool, product, or innovation?
The computer. The internet. The ability to search and find different resources.
Access to information?
Yeah.
Okay. I think about how much we know simply because we can use this.
Yeah. Well, and there's also people on there. I can send a Twitter message or X message to a professor in almost any state and get an answer. So. Yeah.
Well, Paul Butler, he's got a Kinsey planner, and I send him a message. Hey, I need to retool mine. What are you using? Oh, come back and do this. And by the way, do this. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, I think one of the big things on Twitter too was it was the gentleman from Texas that taught everybody to put a 5-second squeeze of Dawn dish soap in their sprayer tanks. And how many people have started doing that just because he said he did it on Twitter and that it worked for him, kept his screens clean.
And look how much money he cost a bunch of agronomy salesmen. They don't have to sell. That's surfactant. Dawn soap. And he can buy it from China, according to TikTok, for 5 cents a pod.
I knew people that got it by the pallet from Dollar General. So.
Wow. Cool. Access to information is a good one. And we're information starved at time. So the final question, What is one small change that can make a massive impact in the future of ag?
I would say that we need to be more mindful of the environment, only because if we aren't, it will be forced upon us. So it's always good to regulate yourself before somebody else regulates you. So, don't put your anhydrous on before the soil temperatures are correct. There were people spraying yesterday and the day before in 30-mile-per-hour winds. Don't do that. I think we really need to be mindful of those things, because if we're not, somebody else will be. So,
well, unfortunately, your message is a great one. And the unfortunate part comes where we have evangelicals in our industry that say the same thing, but it turns off offensive. And it's real easy for the no-tiller to say, you descript and look at the gullies you made. Well, yeah, okay. But I drove by your fields and you need to do some tillage because you got some real erosion going on and you could still be a no-tiller. So,
well, I tell them if they're going to spray in 30-mile-an-hour wind and it's going towards their own field, it's fine. If it's somebody else's field, they need to think twice.
Yeah. Spraying dicamba when it's really beautiful, hazy evening. That's awesome. Perfect.
If it's over 85 degrees and you're not allowed to spray the soybean dicamba, you probably shouldn't be spraying the corn either.
It's not on a label.
I know, but I have a feeling it might be when they realize it wasn't the soybean chemicals to begin with. So,
well, that's interesting you bring that up, because today I went to a regional meeting for the Indiana Agribusiness Council, and the executive director was talking about one of the initiatives they had was pushing for 4R in Indiana. Great program. I think it's cognizant. But I'm in the Western Lake Erie Basin. So we've been preached 4R for years. And the nice thing is I'm in Indiana, not Ohio, so we got a little wiggle room. But it just amazes me that he was excited that he had 4 companies, 4 retailers in the state of Indiana that were 4R certified. My thought was, ooh, only 4 in the whole state of Indiana. And thinking back to your point is, okay, at what point does something come down that says you will be? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's going, oh my God, they're telling us what to do. Well, we can discuss the merits of every one of the 4Rs and maybe the regulations involved in it. But if we don't do something, it's going to be like Ohio, where Big Mike tractor guy posts a picture of people spread manure on snow and like, oh, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, and Illinois, has the tendency to follow California. So I think it's even more important to watch our P's and Q's around here. So, well,
I hope you're not right about Illinois following Chicago or following California, but I think the bigger picture is we do need to be mindful of the environment, and it's going to come. I know we've been saying it since I was in college many years ago, but we do need to be more, and we are being more mindful in a lot of cases. And I think
it's important not to lapse just with this administration, because it may not be as important to them, because it could totally come back again after a few years and, be another push again. So don't get complacent just because we have a different administration at this point. Yeah. Because I think we all know how it goes. We go back and forth in between, different parties. And so things will come and go, but I would say trying to be environmentally sound is definitely probably going to come back at some point. Oh, yeah, it will. It will. Well, and it needs to. As we get less ground to farm and we have more people that watch how we farm, we need to be. Yeah. Well, Karen, it's been great to see you face to face. We've never met face to face other than here on Riverside. I love seeing you post and hearing you teach about people. I love the way that you lead by example with leadership, and that you want people to know the active ingredient, not because it makes them smarter, but it makes them better. And I really applaud you being a professor. It's great that you're helping bring on the next generation. So thank you for taking time to spend with me and my audience today. Yes. Any closing words you'd like to impart on my audience? If there's any farmers, I hope that you have a safe planting season and that Mother Nature cooperates.
I think that's a nice little prayer. Yeah, not to be sacrilegious in Holy Week, but that's a nice prayer for the farmer. So, to my listeners here, we dove again into one of my guests' upbringing to see how their agriculture roots made the people they are today. And in this case, we see how Karen's upbringing has made her a well-rounded person and a great asset to agriculture, not only in Illinois, but throughout the Midwest. So thank you, and continue to follow as we continue our deep dive into people's ag roots.